Experts say one of the most reliable indicators for re-election currently looks bad for President Trump. He has received an overall positive economic approval rating throughout his first term. However, election forecasters say the pandemic will most likely hurt that record. For more, Catherine Watson joins me now. She's a White House reporter for CBS News Digital. Hi there, Catherine. We're talking about GDP here, gross domestic product. Remind us, give us an overview of what exactly that is and its significance.
Yeah, GDP is basically the standard measure of the value added created through the production of goods and services, to be really technical. But essentially, it's a very good, basic and consistent measure to measure the overall size and health of the economy, the total market value. It's how economic growth is measured. So it's something that economists are watching very closely as we go through this coronavirus pandemic that has obviously just been a complete upheaval for the economy as we've known it.
Well, you mentioned in your piece an election forecasting model which typically uses second quarter GDP growth and the president's approval rating to predict winners. Why is second quarter GDP growth historically such a strong factor in a president's reelection?
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, second quarter GDP, which would obviously be the months running up through the end of June, you would think that that might not be as relevant as the third quarter, which would end roughly, a month or so, a little over a month before the election. But economists and political scientists actually say the second quarter is a better measure because for a number of reasons, but especially because voters really haven't had the time to process those experiences that they've had. It's really the second quarter that matters more. Now, there are other factors that might play a role this year as well, too. We have a lot more people expected to vote by mail, which, of course, will mean that they're casting their ballots sooner, closer to that second quarter. Now, second quarter GDP growth annualized this year went down 33%, just an astronomical historic drop. So that's obviously something that has economists concerned. President Trump's team has really said, hey, look at the third quarter, look at third quarter growth. That's what we want to use. And even next year, that's where we're going to see these gains. But political scientists say that that might be too late for people's lived experiences to really process.
That's so interesting to hear that because you're taking into account people's own humanness, the way in which they actually are able to absorb what is happening and that passage of time as well. Well, back in May, President Trump's top economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, said the third quarter will be the, quote, biggest growth quarter in American history. So explain more, though, this drop that you described of 33%. When you hear that, I think for a lot of folks, it sounds like a large number, but give us some context here. What does that really mean?
Yeah, essentially it means that the American economy is not producing as many goods and services as we normally would. Of course, we've seen just tremendous isn't really the right word for it, really concerning job losses, as well as, doubts in consumer confidence. There are some other economic indicators. You would think those would matter more than GDP, but for some reason, this election forecaster, Alan Abramowitz, who has this model, he has been able to, if he were to use it today, able to accurately predict the outcomes for all presidents, all incumbent presidents who ran since World War II, basically looking at 11 elections and saying, hey, historically, based off of what's happened in the past, things are not looking good for President Trump.
So what about the coronavirus pandemic itself, then? How big of a role could that play in swaying voters compared to the state of the actual economy?
Absolutely. Well, I think we've seen in polling the president's handling of the pandemic is going to be something that very much factors into when voters go to the polls or send in those mail-in ballots. I think we saw towards more the beginning of the pandemic or May, right around then, as some places were starting to reopen, the president really was hoping that the economy could be reopened and that we could get past this pandemic. But I think he's come to the realization that no, these two things, the pandemic and the economy, are inextricably linked, and he's going to have to deal with the underlying pandemic in order to boost the economy and consumer confidence. But it is going to be very interesting to see how much voters actually blame the president for the pandemic when it comes to the economy. Obviously, there probably isn't a lot the president could have done to stop the virus from reaching America's shores, but it's after that point that voters will judge him on, both on the pandemic itself, the health ramifications, and the economic fallout that has undeniably come along with it.
Yeah, really very difficult, dire straits for many Americans out there. Well, the president has made the claim that the United States would plunge into economic depression if Joe Biden is elected in November. So, Catherine, give us a sense. Is that claim rooted in any kind of fact?
It's quite possible that we continue to see a dire economic situation, or at least not an ideal one, regardless of who is president. I think this economic recovery is going to be longer and more difficult than originally many had hoped. So basically, a depression would be a prolonged recession, essentially worse than even what we're going through now, or more drawn out. So it's, really that's the president and his campaign are trying to make that argument of, hey, look, we built one of the strongest economies in history, or the president would say the strongest economy in history. We are going to do it again. And it will be up to voters to decide who they trust more. If they trust the president to rebuild the economy more, or if they believe that Biden-Harris administration would be able to do better with the economy, particularly when it comes to getting a handle on the pandemic, which would allow the economy to grow at a faster rate.
All right, Catherine Watson for us. Catherine, thank you very much.
Thank you.